Hello class, my name is Isaac Kala, and today we'll be going through our Module 1 Week 1 discussion. And the scenario for this week is our Flying Mother assignment. So the scenario goes as follows. We are a private pilot with a multi-engine land rating, and we just bought a twin-engine airplane. We asked for a checkout on the airplane, and next week we're planning to take our family to go visit our mother-in-law. From New England to the Midwest, we did all of our research, we did all of our certificates, documents, minimum equipment list, normal operations, and pre-flight. What is our thought process on this scenario? So, for this presentation, this PowerPoint, I'll be breaking this down into a couple of slides. I will not be focused too much on the technical aspect of multi-engine operations or flying just because I'm still within the process of ground school and learning it too with my flight, but I will be going through all of the necessary decision making, single pilot resource management skills, and our safety policies, procedures, ADM, and we'll be going through that slide by slide in this lesson and I'm all my thought processes for this. So let's get to it. First thing I want to talk about is single pilot resource management. And when it comes to single pilot resource management, basically it's the art of managing all onboard outside resources available to a pilot before and during a flight to make sure that the whole flight is safe and successful. And this differs a little bit from crew resource management because normally in crew resource management you have a partner in the cockpit and you guys can bounce off of each other to make the most effective decision making and skills so that the flight is safe. Now, when it comes to single pilot crew resource management, it's pretty much all on you. As someone who has gone through private and commercial, there's a lot of times where I did solo flights myself, and it was solely reliant on me, just single pilot resource management. So we'll be talking a little bit about this. And there's a 5P approach to single pilot resource management. It goes by plan, plane, pilot, passengers, and programming. Now, how can we use these 5Ps for a successful SRM management? So one thing I want to talk about is we want to use all the resources available. Since we are in this scenario, since we are taking our family, so we're going to assume that we have passengers. Also, in our airplane, we want to ensure we're familiar with the type of avionics that are inside and available for us. Now, how can we use our passengers? So, using our passengers, we can use them to help look for traffic outside of the window. Since we're flying from A to B, depending on if it's a VFR or IFR flight, we can always use our passengers. If there's somebody sitting in the right seat of our airplane, you can also have them help you plan this or execute this flight. Even if they're not a pilot, they can do something as simple as, hey, can you push this button to um, he pushes button so that we can program our GPS to get to the next waypoint. Simple tasks like that, you want to use everything available, all your outside resources. So passengers, I'll be using that. Avionics, you want to make sure that you're familiar with what kind of system you got there and what kind of navigation sources you'll be using. Whether it would be GPS or if you're flying via VOR, you want to make sure that all of your equipment is all good. And a lot of the um, things about single single pilot resource management is that it's really all in the planning and before the execution of the actual flight. So you want to make sure you're going through all of your checklists. As a pilot, you want to go through your I'm safe checklist. Make sure that you as a pilot are as fit to take on this flight. You want to make sure you go through all of your pre-planning, your weather briefings, all of your recencies, your currencies, especially if you just bought this airplane, this twin engine airplane, and you're going to do a checkout in it. I assume that you're not the most proficient at flying, so definitely before you take your family flying, make sure you're really proficient in everything that you're doing. That way, it comes to the flight, it can be executed nice and smoothly. Make sure whoever is doing your checkout with you is going through all of the normal operations and procedures and the emergency procedures. That way, it can be, like I said, a safe flight. Next, we want to talk about the pre-flight or the introduction. So for this part, we want to make sure what type of operation are we doing? Are we doing a VFR flight from New England, or are we doing an IFR flight? Make sure that we're recent and current on both of those. If we're doing a VFR flight, make sure that we're looking at our POH, all of the required VFR equipment that we need. Same thing if we're doing an IFR flight. Look at the kinds of equipment listed. Make sure that whatever you have on is listed in the POH as required is on top and safe and ready to go for on your flight. Minimum equipment list. especially since this is a private pilot and private list, and I would assume that you don't have a minimum equipment list. That's more for commercial operations anyway. Um, I already went through going through normal operations procedures, but a lot of this with the pre-flight and even during the flight is checklists. Practice your checklist on your checkout with your instructor. Make sure that everything is going nice and smooth, and on your pre-flight. And yeah, when you're executing the flight, checklist. I think a checklist, developing a checklist is very important for something like this. Next, I want to talk about safety of flight. This has to do with risk management, in my opinion, and some of the scenarios that might occur during multi-engine operations. So, especially when you're flying a twin engine or multi-engine, there's a lot of risk, and risk is defined as probability and possible severity of an accident or loss from exposure to various hazards, including injury to people and loss of resources. So basically, how do we break this down with risk? We're flying with two engines. A common one is an engine failure on one of our engines, so we have to understand that we know the procedures when it comes to flying on one engine. There's a lot of things to consider. There's a VMC. There is single engine service ceiling that we can fly off of one engine, and then the max altitude that we're able to fly at. A bunch of these you can look into the risk management handbook and the aviation instructor's handbook too to be more familiar with this. Last, aeronautical decision making. When it comes to ADM, and it kind of ties back to a lot of the single pilot resource management stuff that I already explained earlier in this presentation, is that we want to make sure we go through our risk. We want to make sure we're going through our checklist, our paved checklist, pilot, aircraft, environmental, and external pressures. Are we pressured to actually take this trip from point A to point B because we're having our family with it? If we do, are we, is it possible to not do this trip at all? You don't want to be externally pressured at all. Um, some of the risk of travel, especially if we're flying from one point to another, the weather for that flight, the terrain involved in that flight. We want to make sure that we're choosing great altitudes, and like I said, a lot of it comes back down to pre-flight planning. And for me, when it comes to the aeronautical decision making, again, a lot of it starts on the ground before you even get into the air. In my flight school, we have what's called a fitness assessment tool, and actually, I have it right here. And basically, it's a risk assessment form that tells us, that goes through all of our checklists and makes sure, like, as a pilot, are we okay? As the aircraft okay for flight, environment, and it goes through the paved checklist over here. And I think it's important that as a pilot, you develop your own checklist. You don't necessarily have to use your flight school's checklist, but you develop your own checklist to make sure that you are safe to execute this flight. Um, but yeah, that is it for my presentation. If you guys have any questions, feel free to email me. Email is ikala@liberty.edu. And thank you very much.